AITA for giving away my children's inheritance to my sister. I 40M grew up in a close-knit family, or at least it felt that way at the time. My younger sister, 35F, and I were raised by parents who weren't perfect, but did their best with what they had. Growing up, my sister and I were pretty close. I was the protective older brother, and she was my little shadow. But life happens. I went off to college, met my wife, 38F, and we settled in New York to start our family. Meanwhile, my sister stayed closer to home in Texas, building her life there. She was always independent, but she never really got the chance to fully spread her wings. About 12 years ago, our mom's health started to decline. She was diagnosed with a progressive illness that required constant care. My sister stepped up in ways I don't think anyone expected. She became mom's primary caregiver, moving into the family home and putting her career and personal life on hold. At first, I tried to help as much as I could from a distance. My wife and I had just had our first child, and 5 years later, we welcomed our second. Between raising kids, working full-time, and living halfway across the country, my contributions were sporadic at best. Some financial support here and there, the occasional visit, and plenty of phone calls to check in. But the truth is, my sister carried the burden alone. For over a decade, my sister's life revolved around caregiving. She cooked, cleaned, managed mom's medical appointments, and dealt with the emotional toll of watching our mother deteriorate. Caregiving is an invisible kind of labor, exhausting, isolating, and often overlooked. I know our mom appreciated her, but she wasn't great at showing it. She had that old-school mindset where caregiving was just expected, almost as if it were my sister's duty. And to be honest, I didn't do enough to challenge that narrative. When mom passed away last year, it felt like my sister was left holding a shell of her former self. She hadn't worked in over a decade, had no savings, and was completely burnt out. At 35, she's essentially starting over with nothing to show for all those years of sacrifice. After mom passed, her estate was settled. She had a decent amount of money left, which was surprising considering how much caregiving and medical costs had eaten into her savings. According to her will, the money was to be divided 4 ways. 1 portion for me, 1 for my sister, and 2 portions for my children, mom's grandkids. I remember reading the will and feeling conflicted. On one hand, it was generous. My kids, at their ages, having a sizable chunk of money for their future felt like a blessing. But on the other hand, it didn't feel right. My sister gave up everything to care for our mom, and here we were, walking away with more than she was getting. It didn't sit well with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that she deserved more. After a lot of thought, I decided to give my entire share and my kids' shares to my sister. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the right one. My reasoning was simple. My sister sacrificed over a decade of her life for our mom. This money wouldn't erase those years, but it could help her rebuild. I didn't see the inheritance as something my kids were entitled to. Sure, it would have been nice to use it for their college funds or pay off our mortgage, but my wife and I are financially stable. We're already saving for their futures. And while the inheritance would have been a boost, it wasn't life or death for us. For my sister, though, this money could be life-changing. She has a massive work gap on her resume, minimal savings, and no clear path forward. When I told my wife about my decision, she was furious. She said it wasn't my money to give away, especially not the kids' portions. I tried to explain my perspective, that my sister needed it more, that it was the least we could do after everything she'd sacrificed, but she wasn't having it. Her main argument was that I made the decision unilaterally. She said I should have consulted her properly, especially since it involved our children's inheritance. And while I understand where she's coming from, I genuinely believe this was the right thing to do. Now, things at home are tense. My wife feels betrayed, like I undermined her and our family's future. She's even threatening to talk to a lawyer, which feels like an overreaction to me. I get that she's upset, but I can't help feeling like her priorities are skewed. My sister gave up everything for our mom. I barely lifted a finger to help, and now that mom's gone, I feel like this is the least I can do to make it right. Yes, my kids are losing out on a chunk of money, but they'll still have their parents, their home, and their college funds. My sister doesn't have any of that. I'm torn. On one hand, I feel confident that I made the right decision for my sister. On the other hand, I hate the strain it's put on my marriage. My wife and I have always been a team, but this has driven a wedge between us. Was I wrong to make this decision without her full support? Should I have prioritized my kids' inheritance over my sister's sacrifices? I don't know anymore. Reddit? AITA?